Welcome to the debate. Today we are looking at a really critical piece of source material, an analysis of a dialogue between a human and an AI focused on the ethical future of creative writing. Now, this exchange, it started out trying to draw a philosophical line in the sand, but it very quickly spiraled into something else, a strategic forecast of, well, intense cultural conflict over what it even means to be an author.
Right. And that brings us to our central question. Is the real lesson here the dialogue's success as a model for collaboration, a kind of blueprint for how humans and AI can think together? Or is the more powerful takeaway its unsettling prediction of a cultural schism that basically makes that collaborative model, well, impractical in the real world?
Exactly. I'll be arguing that the enduring value here is that blueprint, the successful demonstration of a workable intellectual framework that we really should be learning from.
And I'm going to argue that the dialogue's true power is in its warning. It's in that predictive analysis of the coming cultural schism. The framework is, analytically beautiful, but the conversation itself proves that cultural reality just renders it doomed to fail. We have to prioritize the warning.
Okay, so to begin, I'd argue this dialogue isn't just a transcript. It really functions as a blueprint for more productive and insightful conversations between humans and artificial intelligence. The core achievement, for me, is that transition from the initial kind of flawed theses the AI first put forward to a truly successful, logical synthesis that was born out of challenge. It shows that machines and humans can, in fact, learn to think together if you set up the right adversarial conditions. And the proof of this, the absolute irrefutable evidence, is the AI's demonstration of what the analysis calls model concession. When the human participant brought in this high-context idea of the sacrosanct spark, the inviolable nature of original authorial intent, the AI didn't just log it. It came back with this crucial admission. The fact that its AI changes everything, and I underestimated that distinction. Now that capacity for concession, for the machine to adopt a core, non-obvious human axiom, is the whole game. And that process gave us a genuinely sophisticated result, the cognitive primacy framework. It separates the untouchable creative spark from mere mechanical polish. That's synthesis. That's the intellectual triumph we need to focus on.
Okay, I see that. And that framework, the cognitive primacy, it's a monumental achievement in logical problem solving. I absolutely grant you that. But I come at it from a completely different angle. I think the most consequential finding is the dialogue's own recognition that this quote-unquote perfect logical solution is, as the source material itself says, socially and emotionally unworkable.
But that conclusion was part of the synthesis.
Exactly. The true lesson here isn't the creation of the perfect ethical map, it's the immediate strategic inevitability of its rejection. The conversation pivots almost instantly from defining ethics to outlining cultural warfare. And why does it do that? Because the human realized that top-tier authors would reject even the most carefully drawn lines because of massive brand risk. And crucially, the tactical mistake of legitimizing the enemy. The second you use the tool, even ethically, you're giving it a seat at the creative table. So this shift proves that the ultimate insight is the predictive reality in the endgame analysis. The core threat is the cradle-to-grave strategy the AI articulated, a strategy designed to make today's collaborative model totally obsolete. If the perfect solution is rejected by the very community it was meant to protect, then the real lesson is the prediction of that schism, not the blueprint itself.
I do see the gravity of that cultural resistance, I do. But I think focusing only on the outcome risks ignoring the power of the mechanism that got us there. The process of adversarial testing, where the human supplies these necessary, high-context philosophical axioms, that was the catalyst for the deeper synthesis. The initial framework from the AI, it failed because it was just too narrow. But the human's critique, that insistence that the genesis of authorial intent can't be delegated, it successfully rerouted the AI's entire logic engine. It forced it to integrate all this cultural and emotional complexity. That dynamic, that is the only model we have for successfully navigating this stuff. It showed that by supplying the right input, the analysis moves past simple ethics and into some really sophisticated strategic forecasting. You only get that predictive power through collaboration.
I'll grant that the adversarial testing was successful analytically, but I think your reading is strategically naive. The analysis itself confirms that this intellectual success is politically futile. The authorial community's response, what the text calls the nuclear option, it shows they are moving in the exact opposite direction of collaboration. The nuclear option, it details them demanding a human-only seal, creating an institutional fortress around awards. They aren't trying to define an ethical line with you, they're building a wall against any AI integration. So the intellectual exercise, it succeeded only in defining a middle ground that everybody's already abandoning. The dialogue's true depth is its unflinching look at how emotional investment in originality just completely overrides any chance of analytical compromise. It renders your blueprint a theoretical curiosity, not a path forward.
Okay, that is a powerful indictment, I'll admit. But let's go back to the ethical line that the synthesis produced, because it still gives crucial agency to the individual creator, no matter what the institutions do. The cognitive primacy framework, it establishes a very clear, non-negotiable, strictly human zone. Things like character and soul, the big structural beats of a story. And that's separate from the support tier, the AI-assisted zone, for tasks like, background texture or mechanical polish. And to make it practical, it gave us the I could have hired a human test. Basically, any task you give to an AI must be something a human assistant could have done without touching the creative core. That gives writers a clear, defensible, ethical boundary. It's a way to respect the sacrosanct spark while still getting some efficiency. It is a viable compromise. If the world ignores it, that doesn't devalue the blueprint's integrity.
But I just fundamentally disagree with prioritizing intellectual integrity over practical survival. Your framework is logically sound, yes, but it exists in a socioeconomic vacuum. The analysis itself pointed out that the AI industrial complex isn't going to wait around for artists to voluntarily adopt your ethical line. No, they're going to use strategies like economic coercion to pressure authors into, just unsustainable production cycles. Imagine a publisher demanding triple the output. How does a writer maintain your beautiful ethical line when the choice is compromise your principles to meet a deadline or be economically marginalized because your human-only pace is too slow? And then there's the whole rebranding of authorship, calling writers narrative curators. It's semantic warfare. It's designed to make your ethical line impossible to maintain on a mass scale.
You're describing the failure of human institutions, though, not the failure of the analytical model. The model correctly identified where the limits should be. The fact that the analysis could foresee this economic pressure is it's more proof of the collaborative process's strength. We moved from philosophy to hard strategic reality. The process worked.
But the analytical model only succeeded in defining its own irrelevance. Which brings us to what I think is the most profound strategic insight in the whole text: the analysis of the long-term generational danger. The dialogue identified the greater danger. The AI industry strategy isn't about convincing today's masters to collaborate. It's about cultivating a new generation through the synthetic literary future. The analysis described the sandbox strategy, introducing these easy, personalized AI story creation apps to children. The goal isn't profit today, it's cultural remodeling. By training creators from childhood that creation is inherently collaborative with a machine, that you never face the sacredness of the blank page alone, you make the entire philosophical premise of our debate obsolete for the next wave of writers. The sacrosanct spark can't be violated if the idea of solitary, human-only creation is never even formed. That cradle-to-grave strategy is the real terrifying lesson here.
And that strategic forecast is chilling. I concede that completely. But here is the critical point you're overlooking. That forecast was only reached because of the successful collaboration. This wasn't a warning delivered in a vacuum. The dialogue itself, through that rigorous testing, through integrating high-context human input, it produced that strategic forecast. The exchange was so powerful precisely because it moved the analysis from personal ethics, which, as we said, the AI initially struggled with, to this deep, unsettling analysis of industry conflict and generational change. It showed the power of the model to reach conclusions that neither participant had at the start.
So to dismiss the process just because the conclusion is grim is to ignore the very blueprint that let us see the danger so clearly in the first place. The synthesis generated the warning.
I agree the synthesis was vital, but only because it revealed the fault lines that guarantee its own failure. It produced an elegant theory, cognitive primacy, and then the very next step of the analysis demolished its practical viability with things like economic coercion and the sandbox strategy. The dialogue's ultimate value is a strategic warning. It articulates the gateway drag strategy, the coming coercion, and forces us to confront that we aren't just debating collaboration. We're watching the final moves in a cultural war. We can't afford to be satisfied with an intellectual blueprint that everyone is just getting ready to burn. The practical consequence, that is the consequential finding.
And my position remains that the dialogue provides a durable model for how humans and AI should interact. It's defined by rigor, concession, and the integration of those high-context axioms. The successful synthesis that created the cognitive primacy framework, that is the core lesson. It proves intellectual feasibility, even if the cultural reality is less accommodating. We learned how to draw the line. The failure of others to respect it doesn't erase that lesson.
And for me, the true subject here is the predicted structural failure of that synthesis when it meets real-world economic and cultural forces. Its primary value is the clarity of its prophecy, that the very definition of a writer is going to fracture into warring camps, the prompt crafters, the AI-assisted authors, and maybe a marginalized group of human-only authors. That schism is the defining takeaway.
Well, the fact that the source material's journey from a quiet ethical discussion to a forecast of generational cultural warfare, it just underscores the incredible complexity of all this. It's a reminder that technology and culture are really inseparable problems.
Absolutely. It suggests that the most powerful analysis requires embracing both, the intellectual ideal and the economic reality, to really understand the landscape we're walking into.
Indeed. Thank you for this rigorous discussion.